Hello and welcome to Legal Action, the public interest program sponsored by the DuPage County Bar Association. We come to you this evening with a second program in a series of 3 programs on the very important issue of domestic violence. You'd probably be surprised to learn that every 6 minutes somebody across this country suffers through a domestic violence incident. You might recall that in our last program, we talked about how issues with domestic violence cut across all racial, ethnic, and economic lines. And this evening, we're back again to follow up on some of these very important issues. I am Susan Alvarado, and I'm happy to host the program this evening. To my right, I welcome back Judge Beth Sexton from the 18th Judicial Circuit. Judge Sexton, thank you very much for joining us again this evening.
Thank you, Susan.
I would also like to welcome back Amy Milligan from the DuPage County Family Shelter. Amy will give us more information on what the Family Shelter Services can provide for our citizens. And I'm particularly pleased to introduce this evening our very own State's Attorney, Joseph Burkett. Mr. Burkett, I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your schedule to join us this evening to talk about this very important topic.
Well, you're welcome, and I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. And if we could, Joe, I might actually start with you. I would be very interested if you could help us understand what exactly, or let me put it this way, how is domestic violence defined?
Well, the definition for domestic violence is very broad. Your typical understanding is violence between spouses, between a husband and wife, but it's actually much broader than that. Violence is not just between husbands and wives, but between children, parents, family members, siblings, and not just acts of physical violence, but intimidation, harassment, and it's not just family members, it's also dating relationships, people who live together. Right. Whether they're married, single, regardless of their sexual orientation, anybody who's in a family type of relationship and there's either an act of violence, intimidation, harassment, child abuse, those are all classified as domestic violence, but also what's most important is to understand that regardless of what your circumstances are, there's help out there for you, regardless of what category you might fall into.
I understand, Joe, that our county here in DuPage really, under your leadership, has put together a really cutting-edge domestic violence program. Can you give our viewers an idea of what that encompasses?
Well, I think going back and where we began in the 1980s, when Jim Ryan was our state's attorney, and I was proud to work for Jim and work on this issue with Family Shelter, with the court system, was to open the eyes of our community. We had to do hearings around the county to really open the eyes of DuPage County and awaken people to understand that domestic violence was a serious and remains a very serious issue in our county. Thousands of incidents a year of domestic violence in our county. And quite frankly, the law enforcement response and the response from the criminal justice system as a whole was completely inadequate. So we needed to shape a response by first taking testimony and then developing a comprehensive protocol that included all of the players, including the court system, social services, family shelter services, psychological services through the county. And we developed the Domestic Violence Task Force, which was headed up by Jim Ryan, developed the first protocol, and that obviously has grown out now into a statewide protocol, and each county in our state now has a protocol. So we're very proud of our efforts here in DuPage, but it's a day-to-day process. You're not going to solve the issue or stop domestic violence by just having a protocol. You have to have committed people and a dialogue that's constant.
Right, right. Well, I do know, I've seen this many times, what we have here is the DuPage County Domestic Violence Manual, and I would encourage all of our all of our viewers to contact Family Shelter Services or even the State's Attorney's Office to get a copy of this if they need to. But Joe, I too, being a practicing lawyer here in the county, am very proud of all the work that you and the task force has done in this area. So in other words, we do have a very coordinated approach to domestic violence issues now. Is that right?
That's right, and people have to understand the most important thing is trust your instincts. You know, there's an old adage that Gavin DeBecker wrote a book about it, The Gift of Fear. If you are in fear, there's a problem. You need to get help. Even if it hasn't exploded into an act of domestic violence, there's help out there for you. Pick up the phone and call Family Shelter. Get some guidance. You might qualify for an order of protection. There might be an incident that's reportable to the police, but you're concerned, you want to get some guidance, you want to have some knowledge about the steps that you can go through. And we've really made it much easier for people to get help in this county.
Joe, can you give our viewers an idea how a domestic violence problem might come to the attention of your office? Typically, can you describe how that would happen?
Typically, most of the cases come to us through law enforcement after there's been an arrest. Family Shelter's been contacted, and we'll get a case through the regular process, and we'll deal with the victims through notification. But oftentimes we get walk-ins. We'll have a Family Shelter has a person in the courthouse who takes walk-ins. We'll get a walk-in, get an order of protection, and now, thanks to Judge Ann Jorgensen, Judge Sexton, Chris Kaczmarubis, you can prepare your order of protection online before you actually arrive and not take your whole day. So there's a tremendous collaboration, cooperation to assist victims, and we like to call them survivors as well, but they truly are victims and they need help, and that's what we're there for.
Right, right. So then I guess I would ask you for, first of all, I want to say before I even ask you for your recommendations on how people should perhaps handle any situation that they're worried about, but I would really, I guess I'm just really surprised that here in DuPage County, you know, one of the most affluent counties certainly in the state, possibly in the country, and yet we suffer through this, don't we? I know that statistics can be misleading, but can you give us an idea of how many cases of domestic violence your office might handle, say, in a one-year period?
Well, I would say on average, I think the numbers are about 2,000 cases a year, and that's on average. Now, that's just the tip of the iceberg, because we know, just like elder abuse and child abuse, domestic violence cases are vastly underreported, and usually a phone call is made and a victim is asking for help when it's a crisis. There's a crisis mode. There's a risk of serious physical injury, or even in some cases, extreme cases, death. And again, we all know this. And I think you talked about it in the last segment. It crosses all economic lines, all racial, ethnic, all the barriers, and oftentimes, as with many people who commit crimes, the offender, the abuser, is portraying one face to the public, to his coworkers, to the people in his community, to his fellow church members, and a completely different face to the victim. And you know, that controlling, manipulative behavior, which is oftentimes evident early on, even during the dating stages of a relationship, turn to violence later on in a relationship. And that's why we call it the cycle of violence. It's so difficult to stem the tide, because oftentimes, in many of these cases, and I know Judge Sexton sees it every day, the victim truly loves the abuser and does not want to break the ties of that relationship. But for us to be effective and to stop the cycle of violence, we need that cooperation.
Right. Well, I think you hit it right on the head, and I'm sure Amy would agree with this too, that it's important, and Judge Sexton, it's really important to pay attention to that voice inside you that's telling you that something's wrong, right?
Right.
And we will get more into what to do if you have a suspicion or a feeling like that.